Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Neighbor Killed His Newborn by OK Investigator. Someday in July 2023, my best friend called me to hang out. It was raining and we thought going to his house was a good idea. He lived in a small apartment on the 5th floor. He had a balcony and there was a small courtyard just underneath it. As usual, I got out of my house and walked. We lived about 5 minutes from each other, and I called him on the intercom when I got there and he opened the door. I went into his apartment and we decided to eat something, and then we played some GTA 5 and listened to some music. It started to get boring, so we went out onto his balcony to smoke. But as we smoked, we saw a police officer in the courtyard. He seemed extremely stressed and traumatized and was smoking a cigarette while his hands were shaking. He was searching for something, searching in the bushes, in the trash, and he didn't stop walking around. Inside of me, I already knew something was wrong. We went back into the apartment and everything was calm. We chilled out for a few minutes and then we decided to go and meet a friend of ours. As we opened the front door, we saw the apartment next to his filled with tons of cops, and they all seemed stressed as well, but we didn't know anything yet. We went down the stairs to leave and were stopped by 2 officers. They started asking questions. Did you hear people crying in the last 20 minutes? Have you noticed anything weird these last few days? And I said I didn't live there, and my friend said no. As we descended the stairs, we saw a lot of police cars and ambulances everywhere. I hadn't seen anything like that in my life. We opened the door to get outside, and we decided to sit for a while. We called our friend to say we were going to be late. As we watched, more and more people from the neighborhood had the same idea as we did. We talked with some guy to get some information, but he didn't know more than we did. The moment I knew things were bad was when I saw 2 unmarked cars arrive. They parked, and a woman dressed all in white with a toolbox and a big camera around her neck got out. She looked to be in a hurry and went inside quickly, and we immediately thought, someone's dead. At first we thought it was the neighbor's husband. At the moment, everyone was inside and we just waited. 15 minutes later, we saw the paramedics coming down through the window of the stairs. They didn't have anyone with them. We were certain that someone had died there, so we waited even longer, until we saw 2 men with a gray bag coming down the stairs. We didn't know who was in there, but we were 100% sure that someone had died. Things were getting slow, and our friend was still waiting for us, so we left and then stayed out until noon. When we got back to my friend's apartment, we saw the neighbor with handcuffs and cops standing around her. She looked very calm and confident. This made me think that she was innocent, even with the handcuffs. The day after that, I searched the news and found out that she had mental problems and killed her 1-year-old baby just 5 meters away from us, and her husband had fled the scene and was still being sought by the police. I got chills when I read that. I couldn't believe it was real. The day before she had killed him, she was still with her baby in a stroller, saying hello kindly to us. I still really can't believe it happened, even if I saw the flowers next to the building doors. Uncle Josh note, I've shared a couple of news articles down in the description if you'd like to see the rest of the story. The Man at the End of the Street by Pie Guy. This first started happening 15 years ago and would take place over the next 13 years of my life. It all started in the summertime, about 4 months after we had moved to a new house in a different state. I was 9 years old at the time, and I didn't really have any friends in the area. One day, I was out in the front yard helping my dad with yard work. He would mow the front and backyards, and I would either pick dandelions out of the ground or water the plants at the front of the house. Not super helpful, I know. But I was 9 and wasn't allowed to do anything with the lawnmower besides maybe pull the cord to start the motor. My dad had just finished the front yard and had moved his way to the backyard while I stayed in the front to help finish up. I remember seeing a package on the porch in front of our door and going to pick it up. And that was when I turned around and saw him. A man in his late 30s with long dark hair tied in a ponytail hanging down past his shoulders, wearing a plain white t-shirt, black pajama pants, and no socks or shoes. He was standing at the end of our street, standing with his arms crossed and staring directly at me. Now, for context, my house is 4 houses down from the end of the street. At the end of my street, there is a road that forms a T-shaped intersection. On the other side of this intersection from my house, there are 3 houses, with one house lined up in the middle of my street, and the other 2 houses sitting to the right of it. To the left of the house, lined up with my street, is an old steel treating factory that existed surrounded by houses in our neighborhood and at that time was still active 24/7. This man was standing in front of the house lined up with my street, at the top of the T-shaped intersection. He was standing right off the edge of the street and in front of what I assumed was his house, just staring at me. As soon as I saw him, I immediately froze and stared back at him with a sudden uneasy feeling washing over me. The longer I looked at him, the more red flags I began to notice. To my 9-year-old mind, this man was dressed very strangely, and that had already been an immediate red flag. But the creepiest thing that stood out to me was his face. His face had absolutely no expression of any kind. There was just this intense and piercing stare with him looking directly at me. It felt like he was staring right through me, and for at least 2 minutes we stared at each other, never looking away or even blinking. Eventually, the uneasy feeling built up enough for me to slowly walk myself down off the porch and over to the side of our house, never looking away from the man. When I made it out of sight, I ran to the backyard to tell my dad about what had just happened. I came up to him as he finished mowing the backyard and described what I had seen. And that was when he had told me that he had seen this man the other day doing the same thing, except just staring straight down our street. Arms crossed, plain white t-shirt, pajama pants, no shoes, just like when I had seen him. After that, my dad told me he thought the man seemed off and to stay far, far away from him. Unfortunately, that would not be the last time I saw the man at the end of our street. From that point on, I would see this man much more often. I would be riding in the car with my family or outside doing something in our yard or on our block, and I would look over and see him standing in the same spot, arms crossed, intensely staring. He wasn't there 24/7, but at least 3 days a week I would see him outside, sometimes for 5 or more hours at a time. If not staring at me, staring at someone walking their dog or a car passing by. Once I tried to figure out his schedule so I wouldn't have to be around him as much, but it felt too creepy keeping track of him, because he would occasionally start scanning his head around looking for people to lock onto, which really creeped me out. Now, some of you may be thinking, he's just staring and not doing anything. That's not bad, right? Well, sadly, I would later find out that things were far worse than I had ever imagined. So fast forward about 9 years. I was now 18 years old and looking to get a job to save up for my first car. I hadn't really been able to save any money up to that point, and my parents weren't in any position to be able to help me with purchasing a car. So I knew I had to try and find a job that would be easy for me to get to, and that would pay me enough for me to hopefully get a cheap car quickly. Lo and behold, the steel treating factory next to the creepy man's house had a now hiring sign out front, and I decided that a 2-minute walk to work had to be worth it, even if it meant walking by creepy man's house. I had seen this guy doing this routine for almost a decade at this point, and I figured that it wasn't going to be a problem. So I applied, and ended up getting the job. It was hard work which usually consisted of heavy physical labor and keeping up a constant pace, but nothing I hadn't expected. I started off fairly slowly, but ended up getting much better and able to do tasks much faster. About 3 months in, I was assigned to work on a machine that I had not previously worked on, located in the loading dock. From the loading dock, I had a clear view of the wooden fence that separated the factory loading zone from the creepy man's house, as well as the front of his driveway where he would normally stand. I couldn't see the man standing at his post, but I was able to notice a large hole in the fence, which seemed like it had been made in some kind of accident. The fence was not broken cleanly, but there were splinters and cracks in the fence where the hole had been made. I asked the floor worker who was with me at the dock, let's call him Ronnie, if he knew anything about this, and this actually got us into a longer conversation about the creepy man. Ronnie had been with the steel treating factory for over 15 years and had seen the man during his staring routine more than once. According to Ronnie, the hole in the fence had been made by a creepy man, and he had told the managers of the plant that it had been an accident with his truck. But that's not all. Ronnie then went on to tell me that the creepy neighbor guy actually ran a daycare out of his house, and that it was an unregistered business and actually led to police being called on him more than once. This surprised me, as I had never seen the police over at his house before. But after Ronnie told me this, something else occurred to me. When looking at Creepy Man's house, whenever his van wasn't sitting in the driveway, you could see one of those children's mini playgrounds with a slide and toys built into it, the kind toddlers would play with. This always struck me as odd because never once in those 9 years up to that point had I ever seen anybody else come or go from his house, especially not any children. But I had never really dedicated much thought into it. After Ronnie told me this, I thought back to when I had first seen him as a 9-year-old, and all the other times he had stared at me growing up. I began to wonder if he had been secretly plotting to try to get me over to his unofficial daycare. Sadly, I couldn't really confirm what Ronnie had told me, and at that point I had been dealing with my own personal problems at home, so I just filed the story into the back of my head as something I would not be at all surprised to find out was true. I left that job not long after that, and I'd saved up enough money I needed for a car and was able to make my way into the career field I had been hoping to make it into. Fast forward to 3 years later, and to one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me, and the reason for my sharing this. At that point, I had moved away from home, but ended up having to move back home with my parents for reasons I'm not going to get into. I had also met my girlfriend, and we would spend some nights driving over to my parents' house to watch old movies or play games with my janky basement setup. By that point, my girlfriend was aware of the creepy man, but paid him as much mind as anybody else. As creepy as he wasn't breaking the law by standing there, and our lives already had too much going on for us to be focusing our time and attention on his weirdness. But on this night, I was driving home with my girlfriend for a normal night of watching movies. I didn't want to block my mother's car in our single-lane driveway, so I had recently started parking in the grass patch behind our house. Behind our house was an alley that ran past everybody's backyards. Our backyard had a wooden fence up against the alley, with a separate garage building which opened up into the alley. I had started to park in the grass patch area in between the garage doors and the alley more often, and so that was the direction I had been driving home, silently hoping to myself that the creepy man wouldn't be outside on a pleasant night like this. Well, of course, I had jinxed it, and the way home that I was going ended up taking us right past him, standing and staring us down. I locked eyes with him very briefly as we drove past, headed to the right side of the T intersection to turn into the alley and go behind my house. And here's where things got scary. For some reason, I don't know why, As we passed by the creepy man, I got a really bad feeling. A feeling very similar to the day I had first seen him. A gut-wrenching, something is wrong kind of feeling. So I decided to look in my driver's side mirror. To my horror, the creepy man had actually left his post and started walking quickly in my direction. I can honestly say this was the first time I had ever seen the creepy man not standing completely still. And here he was, walking the same direction I had gone. As my thoughts started racing, I turned into the alleyway and then went 4 houses down, turning into the grass patch behind the garage in our backyard. I immediately told my girlfriend what I had seen and how strange it was. I didn't want to freak her out, but I didn't want her to get blindsided if something bad was about to happen. From the angle that my car was parked, I could turn around in my driver's seat and stare at the alleyway through the slits in the wooden fence in our backyard. I'd be able to see if he was coming and see if he rounded the corner. I locked my car doors, turned in my seat, and reached into my pocket to tightly grip my pocket knife. My eyes widened and my heart started beating fast as I saw him casually walking down the alley through the slits, right up to the edge of the wooden fence, and then pause. After a few moments, he turned around and started walking back down the alley in the direction he had come. I waited about 2 minutes before getting out of my car and slowly approaching the edge of the fence, then walking into the alley to see that he was indeed gone. I've thought about this quite a bit since it happened 2 years ago. I don't actually know if he recognized me or the house that I had pulled into, or why he chose that night to follow me and my girlfriend and scare the hell out of us. Honestly, I don't really care. I was able to move out of that house shortly after that happened, and am now living with my girlfriend, who today is my fiancée. But to that man that stared at me and my entire neighborhood for over half my life, and who followed me and my girlfriend into a dark alley for God knows what reason, let's never meet again. Awoke to My Mother's Screaming by Pokey Momo. It was the early 90s, and I was 6 years old at the time, living with my parents and brothers in a duplex. The events of the night are still burned into my memory all these years later. To get a feel for the house, we were in an end unit of a duplex and had a sliding glass door in our living room that faced the woods. The couch was against the wall, half in front of the sliding glass door, but angled in a way where we could see a TV that was against the wall next to the sliding glass door. One of those big old tube TVs with the wood paneling. Friday night, my father hadn't come home. He was still out drinking. So me and my mom camped out on the couch watching a horror movie marathon. I should add that my father would get pretty drunk and was super abusive, so my mom slept with a knife next to her on nights he would stay out late. It was a rough time for us, but we got through it the best we could. The knife was just a kitchen knife, and that will come into play later. Anyway, back to the event of the night. We were watching Halloween and eating snacks, laughing and having an enjoyable time. We fell asleep around 10 p.m. on the couch, Mom with her back to the couch, and with me in front of her. She was cuddling me. The next thing I knew, I awoke to my mom screaming. This wasn't unusual in my house, as again my dad was an abusive drunk. But when I opened my eyes, a tall, thin man in a black hoodie was standing over us. It wasn't my dad. My eyes met his, and I was frozen, but my fast-thinking mom grabbed the knife from the coffee table and lunged at him. He stumbled backwards and regained his footing and ran out the open sliding glass door. My mom jumped up, slammed the door shut, and locked it. She called the police. When the police got there, they said he probably used a knife to pop the lock. They noticed a ton of cigarette butts that didn't match my parents' brands outside the sliding glass door. They said he was probably sitting out there watching us all night before getting the courage to come in. The police said they had several calls of a peeping Tom that matched his description in our complex over the past couple of months. For whatever reason, he chose our house to be his first. My parents got divorced shortly after this, and we moved in with my grandma. So thankfully, no more encounters. But still, to this day, I check all the locks before I go to bed twice. And I have a pole on our sliding glass door to prevent it from opening. Looking out a window at night still makes me uneasy that someone's on the other side, watching. Creepy weirdos standing over us? Let's not meet again. I dodged being murdered by Dangerous Party. I'm a 36-year-old female in Sweden. I've worked in mental health care for the last 18 years, mainly with people with psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia. I was working at a group home for 9 years and was very close with my coworkers there, especially 2 other females. The last few years I worked there, another female started working there, let's call her M, and the 4 of us grew very close. She was very timid, shy, and friendly, and we got along well. She was, however, often on long-term sick leave because of her own mental health issues, so we didn't meet much at work. But she always showed up at our after-work dinners, so we continued to stay in touch even when she wasn't well enough to work full-time. She told us that she had a history of schizophrenia herself, just like the patients we were treating, but that she was medicated and hadn't had any psychotic episodes for years. Since I have an education in psychiatry and a long experience with schizophrenia, I have no judgment towards people suffering from the illness, and it didn't bother me being friends with someone who had a diagnosis like that. Even after what I will tell you, I still feel the same way. In the summer of 2023, I had moved on to work in a new place, also within mental health, but this time forensic psychiatry, like a halfway house for mentally ill murderers, etc. The 4 of us friends had stayed in touch and still met every now and then for dinner parties. M told us that she had been evicted from her apartment because of an incident where she had accidentally entered her neighbor's apartment in the middle of the night. She told us that in the huge apartment complex she lived in, the doors all looked exactly the same, and that she had simply walked in the wrong door by accident, and that the neighbors had created a scene out of pure drama and reported her to the police. I somehow felt that sounded out of proportion to evict someone just for that. And perhaps the landlord took that kind of action because he judged her based on her medical history, so I felt bad for her. I questioned her if something else happened, and she claimed that nothing did, and that this was the full story. In Sweden, it's very difficult to get a contract for an apartment when you have gotten evicted. You pretty much get blacklisted. M asked me if she could move in with me, since she was literally on the street, literally homeless. I said, of course you can. I've always gotten myself into uncomfortable situations by saying yes instead of thinking about myself, and I had no idea how severe this situation would get when I said yes to M. I live in a pretty small apartment. It's a 1-bedroom that pretty much only fits a bed and a desk, a living room that fits a couch and a TV, and there's no room for an extra bed. I had a small kitchen and a small bathroom, and I have 2 cats. We decided that M was going to live in the living room, and I offered to throw my couch out so she could have a bed there, but she said that she was fine with sleeping on the couch since it was comfortable enough. I insisted on giving her a bed, but she declined. There's a door between the living room and bedroom, but between the living room and hallway there's just an open valve so she wouldn't have total privacy. I hung up a thick velvet curtain covering the valve so it at least gave the sense of a door and more privacy than anything. There was another door from my bedroom to the kitchen, so I have 2 doors to my bedroom. I have to have one of them open at night since my cats like to go in and out, and they also have their litter boxes in the bathroom, and their food and water in the kitchen. I naturally kept the kitchen door open, and not the living room door, since that's where Em lived, and we wanted to keep our privacy as best we could. She wasn't working at this time because she was on one of her long-term sick leaves. I was working shifts, so sometimes I had to get up at 6 a.m., and sometimes I didn't get home until like 11 p.m. I have really severe insomnia and need to combine a couple of medications, and even with that I still wake up easily. I told her that I would appreciate it if she could try to stay quiet those nights when I had to get up at 6 a.m., but that it was fine if she was loud when I was off of work or when I was doing my evening shifts. She was a heavy smoker and a coffee drinker, so I bought her a coffee machine. Yeah, I know, I'm a weirdo who doesn't drink coffee very often, so I didn't have one. And I did that to make her enjoy her living situation a little bit more. The coffee machine in the sink was placed right outside my bedroom door, and again, the kitchen is very small. So, our first night together, I had to get up at 6 for my shift. As usual, I had had a hard time falling asleep. Em had been up several times that night to go out to smoke, and I woke up every time. At 5 a.m. she started making coffee, and since it was literally outside my bedroom door, I was wide awake from the sounds of it. I asked her in the nicest possible way why she was up that early, asking if she had any plans that day. I mean, she was on sick leave. Why not sleep at 5 a.m. if you could? She just said she couldn't sleep. I said I was sorry about that, but I would appreciate it if she could wait while making the coffee until 6 a.m., since I really needed that last hour of sleep because of work. Adding to why I need my sleep is that I have epilepsy, and it gets really bad when I don't get enough sleep. I usually get a lot of seizures when I don't get at least 4 hours of sleep, and I knew that I would probably get seizures at work now, meaning that the day would both be stressful and potentially dangerous for me, since there's a huge risk that I might fall and hurt myself. And it's not a good thing to get cramps and seizures among mentally unstable criminal clients who you're supposed to be caring for. I know, it's not an ideal situation to work in that field with my condition, but I can let you all know that I did quit this job after 6 months. Em just said that she really wanted coffee with her cigarettes, but that she would try to wait until the next time I had to work. I accepted that and went on with my day. But things didn't get better. She continued to wake me up early in the morning and through the nights, and continued to promise to stop, but insisted that she really wanted coffee with her cigarettes. I suggested making the coffee the night before, or drinking iced coffee or Coke instead, but she didn't want that. I may add that she demanded me to be silent at 10 p.m., because that's when she wanted to sleep, and I respected that. She used to get these moments of binge eating where she would empty my fridge and pantry for everything that I had. And I remember this one time when I had bought a big loaf of bread. She texted me 30 minutes after I left the apartment saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, I ate your loaf of bread. I will buy you some more once I get money." But she had eaten an entire loaf of bread in 30 minutes. I had told her when she moved in to feel at home, and what was mine was hers, so I couldn't really get mad about it, but it started to annoy me for 2 reasons. It was getting kind of expensive since it was such huge amounts she was eating, and it was always in inconvenient times of the day, like after an evening shift when the stores were closed. I'd come home hungry, and she'd emptied the kitchen from everything I had bought the very same day. Em also had long black hair that was everywhere, all over the sink, the floor, and the bathtub. I'm no clean freak, but I think anyone can understand that this isn't the nicest thing to step in or see everywhere in your house. She also left her fingernails and toenails on the bathroom floor. There were also pee drops on the toilet seat every time she had used the toilet. I saw a silverfish on my bathroom floor. I'd never even seen one before that. And they eat hair and skin and nails, so I figured this fella probably enjoyed life because of the new dirty condition my bathroom was in. At first I didn't want to say it out straight because I thought it would hurt her feelings, and I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. So I just put a broom and a shovel in the bathroom to imply that we needed to sweep the floor more often. That didn't seem to work, so after a while I told her in the nicest way possible with a smile on my face, "Do you think we could try to clean the floor in the bathroom more often? We tend to lose some hair when we brush it, and I am afraid that we may get more pests. I saw a silverfish the other day, and I don't want it to get worse." I always made sure to say we instead of you, so she wouldn't feel like she was being attacked. She promised to think about it, but nothing changed. I started dating a guy who was head over heels for him. He was also in a roommate situation, so we had a tough time getting any time alone. I asked him if there was any chance that we could get one night to ourselves every now and then in our apartment, and then she, of course, would get the apartment to herself as well. She didn't like that idea, and claimed that she had nowhere to go, no friends or family. Now, I wasn't asking her to leave for 24 hours, just a few hours so we could get some quality time together. She could just go to the library or take a walk or whatever. I was at work for 8 to 10 hours 5 days a week, so she got a lot of time to herself. One of our old co-workers realized that this was really tearing at my mood, to never have any time for myself, and I started feeling really suffocated. She offered him to stay at her place one night. After all, they were friends too. Em said she didn't want to bother her, but we told her that she didn't. They were friends, and that she was more than welcome. I just really wanted one night to myself and my guy. I didn't understand why she made such a big deal over leaving me in the apartment for just one night. But she eventually accepted and spent the night there, and I spent the night away the next week so she could get more alone time too. When I came home the next morning from my night away, I saw that my cat's water bowl had completely dried out. There was no spill on the floor, and it looked like it had been wiped out with a paper towel. I had filled it to the brim just the night before. I asked Em how that was possible, and she said that the cats must have tipped it out. But there was nothing on the floor, like I said. My cats are overly social and usually cuddle up with strangers after just a few minutes. I noticed that the cats withdrew from her more and more over time. In the last couple of weeks, they never left my bedroom except for when they ate or used the litter box. It seemed like they were scared of Em, which I couldn't figure out since she was so timid. I had this old saucepan from the 60s that meant a lot to me. You probably are wondering why a saucepan could mean a lot to someone. But it was my grandmother's, and it was the only thing that belonged to her. My mother used to cook for me with it when I was a little kid, so it has a great nostalgic value to me. Well, Em burnt it one day and made no attempt to clean it. She just left it on the stove and went out to smoke. I came home to find it ruined, and I cried. Em didn't even say she was sorry. She also broke several dishes several times and didn't bother to replace them or apologize. This added to my frustration with her naturally. It had been about 2 months by now, and she kept waking me up at night, kept binge-eating my food, never cleaned, never left the house, scared my cats, and ruined my things. Then I realized she was stealing my prescription sleeping pills. Lots of them. And I only get one per night. No more, no less. As I mentioned, I really need them. I had 20 of them on the nightstand when I left for work. When I came home, they were gone. She denied taking them, which is pretty hilarious, since no one else could have been there. My frustration was getting heavy. The summer heat was strong, and I felt locked up in my tiny bedroom with my 2 cats, never getting any time to myself, never any alone time with the guy I was dating except for once every 14th day. My apartment was messy, and now my roommate was stealing from me. Out of nowhere, my old elementary school classmate texted me on Facebook asking me how I knew M. He had seen that I had posted on Facebook that we were roommates now. I told them that we were old coworkers and that she had needed a place to stay because she had gotten evicted. He said, "I know. Do you know why she was evicted?" And I said, "Yeah, she accidentally went into her neighbor's apartment." He said, "That's not the full story. She broke in and snuck up to their sleeping baby with a knife in her hand. But luckily the father woke up and wrestled her down and managed to save the baby." I felt sick to my stomach. Could that be true? It would certainly explain why she was evicted, but it just sounded so horrible, as she was such a timid, nice girl. I had so many questions, but my friend had the full police report. Apparently the couple that M had broken into was his ex-girlfriend and her family. It seemed that M had a psychosis during the break-in, but those parts weren't public. It was, however, clear to me that she had been lying to me about what had happened, and about how long she had been mentally stable. I started getting paranoid now, and I was really frustrated with everything. I really wanted her to move out, but we did, however, have a contract that said she had 30 days' notice. I knew that if I asked her in a harsh way, it would mean 30 days of chaos until she moved out. So I wanted to handle this as nicely as I could. I started looking for cheap hostels for her that I could suggest to her so she wouldn't be on the streets. I sat down with her and told her that I loved living with her and felt really horrible for this. But I just missed my alone time and that the apartment was too small for 2 people. I told her it wasn't personal, and that I wouldn't want to live with anyone right now, and that I wished it would have worked out, and that I was really sorry and hoped that we would remain friends. She looked crushed and said that it wasn't possible. I showed her the hostels that I found and said that I understood that it wasn't the ultimate situation, but I really needed her to move out because I felt suffocated, and also that the summer heat was making it tough to always have the door to the bedroom closed, and it was tough for me to not get my sleep. She said okay. She was going to try to move out, but not until 30 days had passed, and I said of course. That first night after our talk, she got up and made her coffee at 2:30 a.m. I nearly had a mental breakdown. I had to get up at 6, and now I couldn't go back to sleep. I asked her in the morning for probably the 10th time to not make coffee till I got up, but she didn't even answer me. She just sat on the sofa and stared out the window. I said, "Em?" And she kept staring. I was freaked out, but left for work. She kept being weird, kept making a mess, kept waking me up, kept eating my food, and all I could think about was the incident with her and the baby and the knife. I eventually got so pissed off about being woken up by the coffee maker. I plugged it out and stored it in my attic, which she had no access to. It may have been childish, but I was getting so tired at that point. My sleeping pills had been stolen, and I was starting to feel like Edward Norton in the beginning of Fight Club. The next night, I was woken up at 4 a.m. by her making coffee in a saucepan. I tried talking to her again, explaining the situation, but she just stared and didn't reply. I was frustrated, and I was on the tipping point, so I took the saucepan and stored it in the attic as well. I know, but I was going crazy and just wanted her to stop with these nightly coffee routines and to just get the hint. The third night, I had the guy I was dating with sleep at our place because I was getting really paranoid now over her weird behavior. Not speaking with me, just staring into space. I woke up from my very light snooze by him poking me. He whispered, "Look." In the doorway was M, just standing there silently, staring at us. This was like a scene from a horror movie with her long black hair over her face. And I kid you not, I didn't say anything at first because I wanted to know if she was just standing there for a second doing something by the door. but I realized after a while she was actually just standing still, staring at us. It reminded me of the end of Paranormal Activity when Katie just stares at Micah in the final scene. I sat up in bed and said, "What are you doing?" But before I could even finish that sentence, M slammed the door shut, and I heard the sound of something metal falling on the floor, and her running into the living room. I yelled out, "You need to leave," and started crying hysterically because this was turning into a fucking nightmare. Of course, I did go back to sleep, and I was really happy that I had company that night. I just kept asking myself, had she done that before? Stared at me in my sleep? The next day when I got out of bed, I opened the door that she had slammed shut and saw a kitchen knife on the floor. That was the metal sound I had heard before she ran off. I took all of my knives and locked them in the attic as well. I then asked a friend of mine to come to my house and be there when I told her that she had to move out immediately, that I wasn't waiting the 30 days, which was 27 days later. During the conversation, I really tried to stay calm. I knew she had a mental illness, and I knew she meant no harm. Even so, I was frustrated. I knew I couldn't hate her. I was mostly scared and tired. She, however, didn't even answer when I talked to her. She just kept staring out the window. She left the apartment and sent me a text and saying that I was disrespectful for bringing a friend over to her place. Nighttime came, and I thought it would be a quiet night finally. No coffee maker, no saucepans. But at 3 a.m., I was woken up by her burning dry coffee powder in a frying pan. At that moment, I just felt terrified of her. Her face was dead. Her eyes were black. I suspected that she had gone into a psychosis. So I had put out the fire she had started, and she just ran off to the living room in silence. I knew she had an appointment with her psychiatrist the next day, and while she was away, I packed all of her things. I then sent her a text telling her that she needed to pick them up and give me my keys back, and that I would give her money for a hostel for the upcoming 26 days. She didn't reply. The guy I was seeing came to keep me company in case she would fight me about it, but she didn't. She left the keys without looking at us and left. Our co-workers who were friends with both of us told me that she moved in with a guy that she was dating, and she stayed there for a few weeks till she somehow amazingly got an apartment of her own. She started working again, and I was really happy to hear that. She seemed like she was doing well. But then in January of this year, one of our old co-workers told me that M had called her and told her that everything must burn, that she had a baby that she had to save, and other delusional stuff. She had called 112 about this, the Swedish emergency number like 911, but they hadn't taken it seriously. Emma then proceeded to burn her entire apartment down because the voices in her head were telling her that she had to burn everything to save her friends and family. Her neighbors had tried to rescue her from the fire, but she had fought them off and ran back in and poured liquor on the fire to make it burn more. She was arrested and sentenced last week for aggravated arson. She'll serve her time in a mental institution or prison for a long time, possibly forever. What's ironic is that she will probably be in the facility where I used to work, and end up where she used to work herself. My old coworker was a witness at the trial, and apparently she had stopped taking her medication because she thought that it made her feel numb, and she thought she was stable enough to function without it. Apparently not. She had also stopped taking her medication the last few weeks when she stayed at my house. So when she stared blankly into space, she was going into psychosis. When she stared at me with the knife in her hand. When she burned the frying pan that last night. It's disturbing to think about what would have happened to me and my cats if she would have stayed, or if I'd been a heavy sleeper. I also think about what would have happened to that baby in the apartment that she snuck into before she was evicted. And yeah, I know it's crazy that I didn't just throw her out by then. It was complicated. The reason why I haven't been able to talk about it with my friends is because they sympathize with her and have minimized my experience and think that I made a bigger deal out of it than I believe it has been. I sort of understand it, since they have never seen that darkness in her eyes that I saw those last couple of days. Terrorized for over 18 months by alarming seaweed. We moved into this house 5.5 years ago. I'd never experienced anything paranormal before. I was a hardcore skeptic. It was around 18 months later that I began to experience disturbing paranormal events I can't explain no matter how much science I read. Note, I do not have a history of hallucinations or schizophrenia or anything. I was not smoking weed at the time, nor on any other drugs. I was in my mid-20s at the time. The first incident was on a November night at about 10:50 p.m. Almost all the events happened between 10:50 and 2 a.m., but primarily between 11 and 1. For context, I'd spend the last hour playing Among Us and studying from a Spanish textbook. I would listen to relaxing jazz sometimes and drink some Jack Daniels, but I was never drunk. On this night I went to pee. My mind was focused on how clever and funny the games were, and how I couldn't wait to get back to what I was doing. When I pulled my trousers up, a noise caught my attention. There was an Alberto balsam shampoo bottle, about a third or just under full, between the taps on the sink. It's a standard British porcelain sink close to the toilet, but to touch the bottle I would need to extend my arm, bending my elbow. It was nowhere near close enough for contact. The bottle rocked far to the left, then to the right, unnaturally, and repeated this motion about 5 times before it came to a standstill in its original position. It wasn't a small wobble. It was a slow, intentional rock side to side. The bottle shouldn't have been able to rock so far to either side without falling over. My bathroom is tiny, but I couldn't touch the bottle, let alone cause it to rock the way it did. The window was closed, there was no breeze, and no one else was in the room. I tried to replicate it another time by blowing hard on the bottle, flapping my arms and holding myself in the same position as when it happened. But I couldn't touch or get the bottle to move. Even with generous leeway, I couldn't touch the bottle. In short, it wasn't me moving it, and it ruined my night. A couple of days later, I was in the same bathroom washing my hands at about the same time of night when I experienced a sudden and intense sensation that something sinister was behind me, staring at me. I looked up at the mirror and couldn't see anything behind me, but I felt something there. I was too afraid to move. I finished washing my hands after a minute or so, and when the feeling began to fade, I left the bathroom. This became a regular occurrence, particularly in the kitchen and bathroom. I felt something there, or that something was watching me and attempting to interact with me. The presence was somewhat imposing and dark, and I couldn't see it. My partner didn't believe me when I told him about these incidents and would go to bed before me, so he didn't witness them at first. I believed this presence was a man, and for a while thought it might have been the deceased elderly man who used to live here. He was placed in a care home at age 95 and was known as a nasty, horrible old man. He passed away at some point. I'm not sure when, but it was either during the incidents or towards the end of them. Additionally, we had a living room carpet, and as these incidents increased in frequency, I began to hear something plucking at the carpet in the corner by the door. When I moved the curtain, there was nothing there, and the noises stopped. This is where my partner comes in, because he stayed up later occasionally and heard the noise. I didn't prompt him. I heard it and remained quiet until he picked up on it. I told him that was the noise I'd been hearing, and he went to investigate but couldn't find anything. This is what made him suspicious, too. We have a rabbit, but checked on him. He was in his cage eating in the next room when the noises happened. And unless he could teleport, pluck the carpet before our eyes while invisible and teleport back into his cage, it wasn't him. Since then, I lifted the floor to see if anything could have plucked the carpet from beneath the floorboards. The floorboards are locked tight, and it would have been impossible to touch the underside of the carpet or underlay. It may have been my mind manifesting fear, but I began to have horrible dreams about an old man with beady, shiny black eyes, a partially bald head, and white hair in a forest. I recognized the layout from a forest far away in my hometown where I used to ride a horse. These dreams were disturbing, and the men were not like ordinary people. I felt like they were trying to toy with me before they killed me. One night I woke up to feel something standing over me. In another, I woke up and briefly glimpsed black writing all over the wall on the landing. When I blinked, it vanished. I was terrified and often felt something on the landing or in the room. I have no history of sleep paralysis before moving to this house. My partner told me he believed that whatever it was enjoyed scaring me and was feeding on my fear. After this, I tried to not be afraid and to confront it, which worked to some degree. One of the worst incidents was when I knew the man was there. I felt him standing about 2 feet away from my computer chair. He liked to stand over me and sometimes breathe on me while I was gaming. I was playing World of Warcraft, and I remember exactly what I was doing. I knew he was trying to get my attention, and I ignored him. I forced myself to calm down. Then he moved closer, and I heard a huff, as though someone breathed heavily through their mouth only inches from my ear. I took my headset off and looked around, but the presence disappeared into the kitchen. I felt he wanted me to follow him, so I did. My attention was guided out of the window as though he was leading me there. I went to the window and looked out. I saw a shape out there that looked like an adult male of about 6 feet, wearing a gray hoodie and gloves, standing near my back fence as though he'd just climbed over it. Could I have been mistaken? Well, yeah, but I tried to run from the window and ended up in freeze mode by the kitchen door. I couldn't move. I tried so hard to get away because I thought this man was going to break into my house and attack me. I don't know where the man was, but after 2 minutes I made it into the living room. 2 more and I went back to check. The man and the real man were both gone. A strange part of me believed the man chased the real figure off. I felt as though he tried to save me that night, and I became more sympathetic to him. There was another incident which could be explained, but my partner wasn't convinced. We had a small children's desk with 2 wooden chairs behind us, and we stacked the chairs on the table while our daughter was upstairs. While we were on our computers, the chairs came crashing to the floor. They were precariously stacked. The doors were open, and there was a breeze, but the wind shouldn't have been capable of knocking even small wooden chairs to the floor. This happened in daylight in the late afternoon. Over time, this began to fade. I feared the man less. I often felt his presence in the kitchen standing far too close to me. One time I felt a sudden icy blow down the left side of my neck. Our house is cold and drafty, so although I'm convinced it was him, it could have been something else. My nightmares also began to disappear. Sometimes I would hear him walking upstairs, and I sensed him go into my daughter's bedroom just to look at her. He never did anything to her. My partner also experienced something going on in the house on several occasions, but he remained somewhat skeptical. Eventually, everything stopped. After the man disappeared, we had issues with animal footsteps on the stairs. It sounded like a cat running up and down. And the first time it happened, we couldn't see anything. The plucking noises continued, and around this time our house rabbit, for some reason, jumped out of his cage, and we had at least 2 to 3 incidents where he bolted up the stairs and went into our bedroom. He was running about, and this was abnormal for him. Of course, we blamed him and locked his cage tightly so he couldn't escape again. But the noises continued. My ex was woken by the noises one night and investigated them, only to find the rabbit in his cage, and the noises continued. The noises and incidents have stopped for quite some time now. The house feels at peace, but that was a deeply terrifying set of events that actually ruined my life and made me feel unsafe in my own home at night. What could it have been? Always Trust Your Gut Feeling by Can't Jump for My Life. Before I go any further with this, I know I have done some pretty stupid things over the years, and I never really believed in the paranormal until this incident happened. When me and my best friend were in high school, year 11 to be exact, I was staying over at her place for the weekend after I had finished my work shift. It was around this time my best friend had an art project that was due soonish, and she didn't have any inspiration to help her create something original. Then she came up with the idea to do a freaky photo shoot to see if that would help inspire her to create something. And I ended up being her muse, you could say. Mind you, she is very much into special effects and stuff, as she is a makeup artist in the making. So by the time she was finished with the makeup, you could say I looked like a decaying and walking corpse. We decided to take some photos out in her backyard and then go analyze the pictures. Some got her attention and some didn't. So then I cleaned myself up and we tried again, but this time I was made up like an elf-like character. That's when I got the brilliant, but not so brilliant, idea that maybe we should go to the nearby lake, since there were some awesome places there that would be perfect for this. Mind you, it was already 11:30 at night. The first mistake we made was actually going through with the idea at 11:30 at night, which, well, it was pretty stupid to begin with, since all the bad things happening around our local area, things like missing people and animals, murders, etc. That alone should have been a clear indication that we shouldn't have been going, but that wasn't a thought to us in the slightest. So my best friend drove us there and parked in the big empty car park, which was another clear indicator that we really shouldn't have been there. We just sat in her car for a good few minutes just discussing how the photos should be taken. That's when I got a chill down my spine and the sensation that we were being watched by someone from somewhere. That feeling never left, and to this day I can't believe my stupid self had just blatantly ignored it altogether. But I wasn't the only one. My best friend also got the exact same feeling I did. But we proceeded to get out of the car anyway and start taking photos like we had discussed. She has fake realistic swords and other weapons, so we were using those as props, and everything was going perfectly fine, besides feeling like we were being watched. What happened next still makes my heart stop, because the place we were at had hiking and biking trails as well as being surrounded by a woodland area. What we heard whilst in the middle of taking some more photos was the sound between a strangled and dying animal mixed with a high-pitched human scream. And when I say it sounded way too close for comfort, I mean it sounded too close for comfort. That sound lasted for a good solid minute, just one singular sound with no breath in between it. Then it stopped, and everything went eerily quiet. Way too quiet. Now looking back on it, there was no sound of insects making any noise when we got out of the car, and there was very certainly none after that sound, which only means that there was a predator or something of the sort nearby. I thought I was just hearing things, or thought it possibly was just a native animal of sorts. At that point, my best friend and I were starting to freak out a little bit, because we heard the sound of sticks on the ground snapping in half to the right of us near one of the hiking trails, which wasn't too far from where we were not that long ago. We tried not to panic and finish off the last of the photos. That was another dumb, idiotic idea. But at that point, we obviously had made a few. I think I was zoning out and focusing on what she wanted me to do, for example, like holding the sword in a swinging position like you were about to slay down a beast. She had stopped giving me instructions, and I looked to her to see that she was standing and looking terrified to say the least. I said, you good? And she said, slowly come over to me But whatever you do, don't look behind you." When she said those words, I instinctively and very stupidly looked behind me. Standing about a good 10 meters or so from me was a tall, stocky, but lean black figure. It wasn't quite human nor animal from the looks of it. But at first I thought it was a kangaroo with the way it was carrying itself. A very big kangaroo in this instance. Yes, I forgot to mention, we live in Australia. It was then that I wished I hadn't looked, and now looked back at my best friend and realized we needed to leave immediately. Because whatever the hell that thing behind me was, it definitely wasn't friendly at all. But we couldn't just bolt back to the car, as that would definitely cause this thing to chase us down, and definitely it would catch up with us with no trouble at all. So we had to, as calmly as possible, pick up our belongings and slowly go back to the car. Since I didn't know what the hell we were dealing with, I didn't want to keep my back to it, as that would have been very stupid, and I wanted to make sure it was still there. Thankfully it was, but as soon as we got to her car and quickly got in, making sure the doors were locked, I looked out the windshield and saw that it was no longer there. We quickly hightailed it out of there, and once back on the road, I looked in the side mirror on my side of her car and saw the figure standing motionless in the middle of the road watching us leave. That was when me and my best friend finally could process what had just happened. Then, just before we got to the main road again, there was an actual kangaroo standing in the middle of the road, which freaked us out more, but we didn't get into a car accident from it. The car horn was beeped, and the kangaroo went on its way, and so did we. Once at her place, we quickly got inside and locked the doors, shut any open windows, and locked them as well as closed the curtains. The rest of the night and early morning, we could hear scratching and tapping on the windows, which we ignored, and we decided to go to bed. Needless to say, always trust your gut feeling, or you may not live long enough to tell your tale. Horrifying Experience at a Bus Stop by Throwaway. I'm a 19-year-old girl residing in East London. 2 weeks ago, I was on a night out in my town, which I won't name. However, it is on the eastern outskirts of Greater London. It was a cold Friday night in early May when I began to walk home. By that time, I was heavily drunk and had split off from my friends Sonia and Marcus, who were also blackout drunk. They took the Elizabeth line to get home to their university digs in Harrow, so I was left all by myself. As I began to walk to the bus stop, which wasn't far from the club, I noticed a tall, skinny man with his head in his hands sitting on the red plastic bench at the stop. I couldn't see much of his face as it was obscured by his long, dark brown, messy hair. I sat down on the bench furthest away from him because it was around 1 a.m. and the area was deserted. And honestly, this guy was giving me the creeps. He was wearing a dark brown leather bomber jacket, green cargos, and a Mayhem Band t-shirt. I sat and waited for the bus for around 5 minutes, scrolling through TikTok, when suddenly my focus was interrupted by the sound of sobbing coming from my left. I turned to see the man, head still in his hand, sobbing uncontrollably. I glanced at him several times before making my decision to scoot over to him. I put my hand on his shoulder. Keep in mind, I was still in my drunk-induced, confident, sociable state. He looked up at me, and admittedly I thought he was quite handsome. But that was until I was hit by his breath, which was a foul stench, a mixture of cigarettes, vomit, and tooth decay. He had thick, furrowed, dark eyebrows, short yet unkempt stubble, and tears rolling down his face. I asked him, "Hey, are you all right?" At that point, his facial expression changed, and he let out a loud smoker's cough, covering his mouth with his elbow. Wiping his tears away with the same elbow, he looked at me in the eyes and simply said, "I've hurt a lot of people." At that point, starting to sense the vibe was off, I asked, "What do you mean?" I felt the alcohol starting to lose its effects on me, and I regretted interacting with this man at all. He told me plainly, "I killed someone." At that moment, my heart sunk to the bottom of my chest. Part of me thought he must be joking or lying. I timidly said, "Wait, what?" I was choking on my own words. He went on to confess to me that he had killed a 17-year-old boy after arranging a gay encounter with him over Grindr. He told me that he stabbed the boy in the neck with a screwdriver before burning his body in the woods with lighter fluid. I stood there aghast at this sudden confession when I saw the headlights of the night bus approaching in the distance. Without hesitation, I boarded, tapped my oyster, and looked back. He didn't follow me on. The bus doors slammed shut, and I rode the bus only for around 4 stops before reaching my house. As I stepped off the bus, I looked to my left only to see a dark figure with long dark hair running towards me down the street. I booked it towards my house, shoved the key into the lock before slamming the door shut and screaming for my mom. That night I dreamt of the encounter in vivid detail, and the following night, and the night after. However, as the nights went on, I would see the act of murder in his eyes as if it was a projection. The dream would pause as he looked up to me, and the pause would be longer each night, seeing more vivid details reflected from his dark green eyes. The dream stopped around a week after the experience, but I was left deeply disturbed. What unsettled me the most was his voice, robotic and deep, sounding almost distorted as I dreamt of him more and more. My last dream was on the night of May 11th, a Saturday night. I was awoken to complete paralysis of my body. I heard as clear as day from across the room, there wasn't just one victim, loudly, in a female voice. I made my official police report today and was given a reference number. The police told me they would try to identify the man as he was caught on CCTV walking past the club I was at several times that night, which ironically is opposite the police station. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you feel so inclined. Leave a comment, and I'd love to hear how you feel about the stories, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible there. Please follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. And of course, if you'd like to take your support to the next level, find my Patreon link as well as a link to my storefront at tpublic.com in the description. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. More designs on the way. Everyone, thanks so much for your birthday wishes. I had to get something out on my birthday. Good God, I am old, but hey, you know what? I don't feel a day over 30, even though 30 was a long, long time ago. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.